Chapter 29. Nothing changed. Alicia still found herself standing in the same parking lot hidden behind the trees. She watched as a few cars drove by and a person walked down the streets. "It didn't work," she said. "You do not see any difference at all?" Sadar asked. "No, it all looks the same. What do you see, Kenny?" she asked. "It is empty. The people are gone. The buildings seem to be empty too." Alicia looked around her. All she could see was the human world. "Close your eyes and tell yourself that you are somewhere new," Sadar said. Alicia closed her eyes and did some of her deep breathing exercises. She tried to imagine what her son saw. She counted to 5 and opened her eyes. It looked the same. They walked out of the clearing and towards the street. The city had woken up, and cars were rushing on their way to work. The sidewalk was mostly empty. It was just them and a man sitting against the street side of the buildings. He didn't look at them, but Alicia couldn't tell if he couldn't see them or if he was not focused on the world in general. When they reached the end of the block, Alicia stopped. In front of them was a road with cars streaming back and forth, and both Kenny and Sadar were going to walk right in front of them. "Stop!" Alicia screamed. They both stopped on the edge of the sidewalk. "You can't cross here, it isn't safe." She held on to Kenny's hand, pulling him tightly towards her. "What do you see?" Sadar asked. "There are cars everywhere. You can't let him walk into that." Her voice came out as a plea. "There is a place up ahead that is concealed in both worlds. I want to make it there before Kenny heals you, in case you slip back completely to the human world. We need to walk across. It is safe. I'll show you." Sadar stepped off the corner and straight in front of a car. Then he disappeared. Kenny disappeared. He was no longer holding her hand. The man looked up at her in confusion and then rubbed at his face. It was overgrown, with a strangely black beard and long, strangely black hair that seemed to highlight his wide eyes. He picked up his few bags of belongings, stood up and walked away, muttering under his breath. Every few steps, the man would pause and glance back at her. Her bags were heavy, and all she wanted to do was sit and rest, but she had to get back to her son. The world was still unchanged, but it wasn't hard to figure out that she was back in the human world. She reached out with her hand, as though she could break free and reach her son if she tried hard enough. Would Sadar come back for her? All she could do was hope. She looked around at the busy street corner. It wouldn't be safe for them to come back here in front of everyone, so she would have to go to them. She pushed the button to cross the street. She waited until she saw the green humanoid figure and walked across. "This is how you cross a street," she thought. The other side held more stores. These were smaller stores that opened towards the street. Alicia kept walking, trying to decide where Sadar had intended to stop. Then she saw the alley between 2 stores. It was filled with trash cans, but not much else. She glanced around again and saw no better prospects. She walked down the alley. She was so tired, but the ground was dirty and the air smelled. The best she managed to find was a relatively clean wall behind 2 trash cans. She leaned against that and hoped that they would find her. It didn't take long. She had barely rested her head back before they strolled around the corner of the alley looking for her. Sadar crouched down next to her, a look of concern on his face. "It shouldn't be that hard for you to be in the in-between." "I couldn't focus. My head feels like someone is constantly taking a sledgehammer to it. Every part of my body is still sore, and it has taken all my energy to move one step in front of the other. Also, these bags weigh a ton. Did you slip weights in them?" "I should have considered. I knew you weren't yet healed, but you didn't complain once. I didn't realize that you were so impacted." "What is the point of complaining? It would not have helped our situation any, and there was nothing we could do that would have been safe. Most humans would have complained anyway. Elves also." Sadar looked around. There was a row of trash bins lined up against a chain-link fence at the end of the alley. Some of the trash had escaped and littered the ground, filling up the space with a rotten stench. In front, there was a steady flow of traffic on the road and the sidewalk. He shook his head and let out a sigh. "This is not the best place, but let's heal you. Then we can see if that will help you stay in the in-between. If it doesn't work, then we will have to make some decisions fast." "It will work," Alicia said with determination. Sadar gave a curt nod and then beckoned Kenny to move closer. "I'm going to need your help. Once we shift over, I'm going to need you to heal your mom right away. You will be tired, but we are going to have to move fast after you're done. You are going to have to be strong and brave. Can you do that?" "I'm ready," Kenny said. Alicia felt Sadar's hand on her shoulder. Kenny wrapped his arm around her chest. She had a fleeting feeling of nausea, and then it was the same alley, complete with trash. She was still seeing the human world. "Close your eyes," Sadar said. "I need you to keep them closed until after you are healed and we find a safe spot to regroup." "I'm not going to be much help with my eyes closed." "You are not going to be much help if you keep shifting back to the human world. I know I'm asking a lot, but can you trust me on this?" Alicia looked at Sadar. His face was the same emotionless mask, but there was an urgency about him. She realized suddenly that he had come back for her. He could have taken her son and left her, but for whatever reason he didn't. "Fine, I'll keep them closed." As she closed her eyes, she could hear Sadar's sigh in relief. "Your turn," Sadar said. Alicia felt her son's hand fall on her shoulder. Then she felt energy racing through her body. She visualized white light settling in and pushing out every hurt and negative thought. The light filled her, making her feel as strong as she had ever felt. Then it left as suddenly as it had come. Her son's hand slipped from her hand, and she opened her eyes to make sure that he was okay. "Keep your eyes closed. He's fine, just tired. Can you walk?" Alicia nodded, but Sadar paid her no attention. She closed her eyes again and felt Sadar's hand in her own helping her up. "Here, have this. It will help. Eat fast, then we will need to hurry." There was a crinkling of wrapper, then the unmistakable sound of her son chewing. Then she felt her body being lifted from the ground. "What are you doing? Let me go," Alicia said. "We need to hurry, and we can't do that if you can't see. So you are just going to have to let me carry you." "The pain is gone. I should be fine now. Just let me down." "I hope you will be, but we don't have time to find out right now. We need to go." He held her in his arms like he was carrying a baby. Even healed, she was a liability to the group. She supposed that she should feel lucky that he hadn't thrown her over his shoulder. She could feel him running. Every time his foot hit the pavement, she felt her body jostle. There was joy in it. Her body no longer hurt. She had grown used to the pain, and now she felt light in a way she hadn't in what felt like years. Every so often they would pause so that Kenny could catch up. Then she felt guilty. She should be carrying him, letting him rest after he had healed her. They stopped briefly, and Alicia heard Kenny unwrap and eat another candy bar. Then they started moving again. It was hard to judge time with her eyes closed, but it felt like at least an hour before her feet were put back on the ground. "Can I open my eyes now?" "Yes, now should be a good time." She saw Kenny slumped against the side of a building. He was rummaging through one of the bags, unwrapping a new item before he managed to finish eating the last one. "Look at that!" Kenny stopped eating enough to point to one of the buildings. Alicia saw a store with wedding dresses in the window. Then she caught a flicker of green, and the building seemed to shimmer. Vines covered the same building. A few kids were running around in rags. A woman was sweeping out the building, and a few more adults seemed to be picking vegetables off the vines. One of the younger children ran up to an adult and begged for one of the tomatoes. Alicia could not understand what was said, but the child went away disappointed, and the adult seemed almost mournful. "You said they were hungry, not starving. There is food all around here." She saw some produce growing on a large section of buildings all down the block. "Good, you can see. We need to move. We have been here too long." Kenny looked down at his bag of food and then at the children. He stood up and moved towards them until Sadar put a hand on his shoulder. "They will remember the strange elf child that gave them human food. We cannot afford to be remembered." As Kenny put the food back in the bag, his face lost his easy grin, and a scowl took its place. They began to walk, but Alicia found herself having problems. She could now make out the elven world, but she still saw the human world. It was so easy to see the human world, the world that she understood, but she tried to focus on the elven world. The family had taken over nearly a block for their garden. Vines covered the buildings, and plants filled any open space. There wasn't much, but they had managed to maximize what they had. The adults looked tired. The few children seemed to be going around doing odd jobs and then sneaking away to play. Since there were no cars, the elves took up more space, leaving the only place to walk in the middle of the road. The human world was quiet. There were cars parked on the side of the road, but none were driving past. Alicia was grateful. It was easier to see the elven world, but she didn't think that she was ready to ignore a car barreling at her. The elven world was much greener than the human world, except the greenery appeared in patches. They would pass rows of houses covered in vegetables or fruit trees. Then there would be areas of nothing but neglect, followed by acres of magnificent rock sculptures. The elves they passed by did not give their party a second glance. Everyone seemed to be busy, yet the people walked around in rags with tired, beaten expressions on their faces. Alicia still struggled to see the elven world. She had to consciously remember that the road was now the way to move, shared by pedestrians and the occasional cart. The first time a car came barreling down on them, Alicia yanked both herself and her son to the safety of the sidewalk. Except the sidewalk seemed to be the play place of young children, or set aside for storage. Her sudden movement knocked them into an older elf resting on a chair. She stood up, shouting at them in a language that Alicia did not understand. Sadar spoke back in the same language, his tone apologetic as he pushed them forward and pulled them back into the road. "Are you still seeing the human world?" he asked. "I see it better than your world. Nothing here makes any sense." "It is going to get worse real soon. I need you to remember that nothing in the human world can hurt you. It is not real, not here. Pretend you are on vacation in another country and try to focus on learning the culture. Maybe that will help to connect you more." The next time a car came at them, Alicia stopped in the road and closed her eyes. She could feel Sadar moving towards her, probably making it look like they were in conversation and not randomly stopped in the street, in the walkway. What Alicia did not feel was the car. After a few seconds, she opened her eyes and turned to see the vehicle continuing away from them. It was ultimately focusing on the people that seemed to help connect her. They passed one house with an elf outside, using what Alicia assumed was earth magic to sculpt rock statues. Alicia found it fascinating to see a figure being produced right before her eyes, yet no tools were being used. The further they walked, the more they started to see elves. There were no crowds, and there were still stretches of abandoned land, yet there seemed to be enough crops to keep everyone fed. "Why isn't every yard covered in crops?" Alicia asked. "Not everyone can grow crops, especially not in the city. It takes a combination of earth and healing magic. Elves have to work together, and they usually cannot manage large crops." "Even so, we have passed quite a few of these yard farms. If there is food being grown, why does everyone look so hungry? Even the people growing the food seem to be looking on it with yearning." "I'm not sure," Sadar said, sadness flickering briefly on his face. "I think I have an idea, though. Elves use a bartering system, and that includes taxes. I think the king may be taking much of what they own." "That's not right," Kenny said. He was walking between Sadar and Alicia, watching the new world with fascination. "It's not right that they have to grow stuff they can't eat." "I agree," Sadar said as he patted the boy on his shoulder. "Maybe we will be able to do something about that.